It's an outrage. There it is, recording.
All right,
Okay,
we are recording.
we're good.
Hello, my name is John Weeks. I am a feature writer and a researcher at the Libertarian Institute. And this is my first venture into podcasting. I'd like to thank the great Institute Director Scott Horton and his Secretary of All Things Awesome, Rachel Nelson, for making this possible. Also like to thank Institute Managing Editor Keith Knight for his technical consulting on this project. My guest today is the great Barry Eisler. He is a New York Times best-selling novelist. Barry has a law degree from Cornell University. He has worked as a lawyer and a startup executive in the tech industry, and he spent 3 years as a covert officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. Barry is trained in hand-to-hand combat, small and long arms, explosives, counterterrorism, agent recruitment and management, and he can cook. Welcome, Barry.
I feel like people are they're gonna hold all this against me. It's good to be here.
This is all
Thanks
good
for having me,
stuff.
John. Thank you.
Anyone who would hold that against you is politically unreliable.
We'll find out.
But Barry, you are a New York Times best-selling author. You've just published your 19th book, The System, which I've read. I love. I endorse it. And yeah, I was hoping we could talk about this new novel and all of the real-world shenanigans that informed the novel and that it shines a light on.
Love to. Let's do it.
All right. So my sort of long elevator pitch for your book would be it's about a young Latina named Valeria Velez who gets elected to the United States House of Representatives from a district in California on a progressive platform, the centerpiece of which is enacting universal basic income. And her plan to do that is to shift money from the ubiquitous and infamous military-industrial complex to her UBI program. And the powers that be in defense say, oh, no, you don't, bitch.
That's pretty much it. And I like the way you laid that out because it tracks with a principle of storytelling that I learned from a guy named Michael Arndt. For anyone who's interested in these things, Michael Arndt is the guy who wrote Little Miss Sunshine and a number of the Pixar movies. And he's got a video called Endings, the Good, the Bad, and the Insanely Great. You can just search for it online. You'll find it. It's about a 1-hour video analyzing the similarities between Star Wars, The Graduate, and Little Miss Sunshine. And it is absolutely fascinating. Anyway, Arndt points out that all stories start like this: once upon a time, and then one day. And take any of your favorite stories, novels, movies, television shows, and apply this rubric, and you'll see, oh, that's just what it is. Once upon a time is the ordinary world that has to be established at the beginning of the story. And then one day is the inciting incident, the thing that knocks the ordinary world out of balance and forces a protagonist to take action to try to restore the balance in some way. So yes, Valeria in the opening chapter of the book has just been elected to represent California's 27th district in a major upset victory against a 10-term corporatist incumbent. And in that very chapter, the Pentagon announces that it is moving its next generation air dominance fighter jet program from its Plant 4 complex in Palmdale, California, that's in Valeria's district, to Fort Worth, Texas. That's going to put 5,000 of Valeria's constituents instantly out of work. And so Valeria is instantly forced to choose between her values and ideals expressed in her campaign rhetoric, which was, we're going to stop stuffing the maw of the military machine and return power to the people. She has to choose between those values on the one hand and some form of compromise and negotiation with the system itself in order to protect those jobs. If she doesn't protect the jobs, she will certainly be a one-term congressperson, a one-hit wonder. She'll actually get nothing done other than to serve as an object lesson for what happens if you take on real power in America. On the other hand, if she does campaign for those jobs, what's going to happen to her soul? And that's her dilemma. And the rest of the book is her attempt to negotiate, to treat with the various power centers that really run America. We're not talking about Democrats and Republicans here. We're talking about Silicon Valley, the Pentagon and the military industrial complex, Wall Street, the real power in America, not the veneer of power. And I know I do this all the time, but there are so many non-fictional sources that inform this book. And one of them is a terrific book called American Exception by a historian named Aaron Good. Good, just like the word bad and good, no E at the end. And what Aaron focuses on in all his work is how power is really exercised in America. What is the nature of what a lot of people, rightly, in my opinion, call the deep state? Ironically, that used to be a term of the left, and now it's migrated over to the right, but I think it's accurate in all cases. But we could be talking about the blob, the establishment, the oligarchy, the powers that be, the rulers, the owners, as George Carlin called them. It doesn't really matter. But what we're talking about is where real power is exercised in America, and that's fundamentally what the system is about.
Excellent. I first heard that term deep state in connection with the Arab Spring in Egypt.
Yeah.
People were talking about the Egyptian deep state.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, oh man, that's terrible. Those poor people living with the deep state.
It must suck.
Yeah, that's horrifying. And then at some point it became just part of the discourse in America talking about our system.
Yes.
And so I always connected it to, the restoration of democracy in Egypt, where the deep state came out with live ammunition and put down the protests. And said, we're back in charge officially.
Yes. I love, one of the things that I do in the system and that I try to do generally is to apply words, nomenclature that our own establishment uses solely in reference to outgroups, unfavored outgroups, to try to apply that same nomenclature to what we see in America and to see if it works. So words like oligarchy, for example, only recently have you started to see words like oligarchs used to describe what happens in America. We have billionaires. Russia has oligarchs. We only have billionaires. The other places have a deep state while we have just an establishment. My favorite right now is probably the word regime. We have a government and an administration, and favored states also have governments, but disfavored states have regimes. The Economist is the best at this. They crack me up. Like, they cannot write an article about Iran without saying regime at least 3 times, and maybe as many as a half dozen, all in the same article. It's just regime, regime, regime. They do that a lot with China too, rather than using the neutral descriptive term government. What's wrong with government? Defense is another good word. We have everything is defense in America. $1 trillion a year on the military, even though we've got oceans to either side and friendly neighbors north and south, or even if we are trying to provoke them these days, still, why do we
powerless frenemies?
Yeah, it's one way of putting it. Our borders are secure. I know people want to argue there's an invasion, whatever. They're not contested the way China and Japan contest their borders, or China and India, or maybe China and Russia, where there have been border disputes and skirmishes. America doesn't have anything like that. And yet we spend $1 trillion a year on defense. That's really wild. I'm just going to mention one because these are innumerable, but I happened to read this op-ed in the New York Times this morning, arguing generally that the kind of attack we just launched against Iran, sorry, it wasn't an attack on Iran. It was only an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. I don't mean to disagree with the vice president or anything like that. I'm sure Iran sees it the same way. The article was saying, look, we can't do this sort of attack against North Korea, which is, no shit. And so we have to do diplomacy instead. And at a high level, yes, I agree. We should be using diplomacy. I don't agree with the article's notion of diplomacy for a number of reasons, but part of the reason for my disagreement is that they can't see all the things they're complaining about with North Korea apply at least equally to America. And I just have to read this one great line because it really cracked me up. Yeah, here we go. And there's so many other things I could talk about, and that, it's all North Korean regime. But anyway, pursuing diplomacy with North Korea won't be universally popular. The regime is far from admirable. It has, among other things, I hope everyone's sitting down for this. This could be very upsetting to learn that a country's regime might do something like this. It has, among other things, advanced its military capabilities at the expense of its starving and impoverished population. Oh my God. Oh, the humanity. I didn't realize until I read this article that North Korea spends $1 trillion a year on its military, that it's $36 trillion in debt, that the service on its debt is now approaching $1 trillion a year, that 14% of its population lives below the poverty line, and yet it spends all this money on the military. I mean, a regime like that would have to be pure evil. It would just be an outrage.
Diabolical.
At the worst, satanic. So this is the kind of thing that once you start seeing these things in the way establishment media presents America to the rest of the world, you see them everywhere. Luckily, we are not propagandized. North Korea is propagandized, Iran, Russia, China. Those are terribly propagandized people. American establishment media just gives us the straight, unvarnished balls and strikes truth, which is great. Because otherwise we'd have a really distorted view of how the world really works and how the rest of the world might see America.
I saw a friend sent me an article in the Wall Street Journal from a couple days ago. And the article is talking about another article written by the scholar Walter Russell Mead.
Yeah.
And his basic argument was that American power has proved that it's still relevant with the airstrikes against Iran. And that, yes, we are a non-empire hegemon in decline, but all is not lost. Look at the greatness that was on display as we bombed Iran's nuclear facilities.
Wow.
And it made me think of a conversation that I had had with you in which you talked about how, American exceptionalism is kind of a euphemism for just always saying we're the best.
Yeah.
And no one else really matters. And you talked about the fundamental attribution error, as you called it. So if we do something that we kind of regard as maybe even evil, well, we had good intentions.
Which redeems it. Couldn't have been evil.
If a regime innocent, we don't like
mistake,
does something that we think is good, well, that's just, they're setting us up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyone who's curious, I would say just search for the term fundamental attribution error. It explains a lot of conflict in the world, but just among humans generally, what my character Monty Cranston likes to refer to as the humans. The fundamental attribution error explains a lot of conflict among the humans generally, but also among nation states. So, for example, when we spend $1 trillion a year on the military, it's on defense. We're just defending ourselves. We don't want to hurt anyone. We would never attack you. We're just defending. Who can argue with self-defense? But when another country spends any money at all on its military, it's a threat to us. They're threatening us. They're belligerent. They're aggressive, bellicose. These are all the words that get applied to example for China, for expanding its nuclear arsenal. I say this all the time. America has nearly 6,000 nuclear weapons. China's supposed to have, I don't know, anywhere from 300, 500, some number like that. Whatever it is, it's less than 10% of the number America has. And America's nuclear technology and targeting technology is probably, at least for now, significantly superior to China's. So when China is doing anything to modernize or even expand its nuclear arsenal, it's always presented as this threat to America. And I always think, like, why is it threatening to us if they increase from, say, 8% to 10% of the size of our nuclear arsenal? But it's not supposed to feel threatening to them that we have 10 times or more the number of nuclear missiles that they do. I'll leave aside the fact that all of this is ridiculous and that human civilization could be ended with just a few dozen nuclear missiles, not the thousands that countries like Russia and America, most of all, but next China and then India, Pakistan, and Israel, North Korea have between them. It only take a tiny fraction of all these nuclear weapons to end all of humanity. Um, Setting that aside, how can it be a threat to us if they're adding a few weapons to their vastly smaller arsenal, but our vastly larger arsenal is not a threat to them? This is just crazy thinking. And by the way, this permeated this New York Times article because everywhere in the article were constant mentions. I meant to search for how many times they used the word threat in the article in connection with North Korea. It had to be at least 3. It might have been 5, 6, something like that. But they never once did anything to explain what that threat is. I don't know. I read the whole article carefully. Is the threat that North Korea is going to attack an American city with a nuclear missile? Don't know. They didn't say. Is it that North Korea is going to share nuclear know-how or nuclear material with another country? North Korea has had nuclear weapons for almost 20 years now. None of these things has happened, at least as reported in the news or leaked from our intelligence apparatus. What is the threat? They don't say. It's just assumed and axiomatic that North Korea presents a threat to America. We have to do something about that threat. And the only question is, do we bomb them? Well, that's not going to work. Okay, in that case, we will need diplomacy. But here's the nature of the diplomacy they recommend. Let's start with no preconditions, and maybe we can't get them to agree to no nuclear weapons, but maybe a nuclear-free peninsula or something like that. Never mentioned is the fact that America, as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has an obligation to continually, in good faith, reduce its nuclear arsenal, with 0 being the goal. That's true for all the nuclear powers who are signatories to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. How is it, a child might ask, that America can demand of other countries like North Korea that they give up their nuclear weapons, or countries like Iran that it not try to acquire nuclear weapons? How is it that we are able to, with a straight face, make these demands of other countries when we ourselves insist on our right to maintain an arsenal of nearly 6,000 nuclear weapons? How would anyone take us seriously? Again, it's a fundamental attribution error. I mean, if we were forced to explain the discrepancy, we would say, yeah, but we're a responsible power, and we only have our nuclear weapons for deterrence. So that's just a completely different thing, being a responsible power and having nuclear weapons only for deterrence, ignoring the fact that there's only one country ever that has used nuclear weapons in anger, has actually used them as other than a threat, but has actually used them to kill hundreds of thousands of people. That's America. That's Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And 2, it also ignores the fact that America doesn't have we won't have a no first use policy. We refuse to do that, which means that we might use nuclear weapons first, even though no one else has done so. We reserve that right. What does it mean when the U.S. government, I would never call it a regime, of course, tells,
Of course not.
and there's some sort of conflict, and the U.S. government says all options are on the table? What does that mean? All options are on the table. What does it mean when a candidate for president like John McCain back in the day sings bomb, 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 Iran? I mean, we say, like, Iran is always like, oh, they're a crazy eschatological death cult theocracy. If they get a bomb, they chant death to America. We can't allow them to have nuclear weapons. And this is from the country that has presidential candidates singing bomb, 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 Iran. All options are on the table. There's a Japanese expression I love that explains so much of human nature and human conflict. It's saramushiri warai. The monkey laughs at the other monkey's ass. Always. Like, can you believe they're chanting death to Iran? Now, excuse me, while all options are on the table, bomb, 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 Iran. It's incredible. The doublethink.
You would not refer to the U.S. government as a regime, but you
Never.
you just referred to our beloved intelligence community as the intelligence apparatus.
Yeah, if you get me started on euphemisms, and I should say, for anyone who's like, what about the book? What about the system? All of this stuff provides both the foundation and the themes expressed dramatically, compellingly, grippingly in the system.
Let's talk
One,
about Monty Cranston.
yeah. So Monty is savant spinmeister. He's somewhere on the spectrum, and I actually alliterated a bit there, didn't I? Monty talks about the power of alliteration, the power of
Yes, he does. He
various
definitely
forms.
does.
Yeah. Uh, he functions in some ways as my Greek chorus to explain propaganda, narrative control, shaping of public perceptions, what Noam Chomsky called manufacturing consent. Uh, and one of the things Cranston points out when someone just reflexively uses some preferred nomenclature, he'll point out why the nomenclature, like, how does this really function? What committee designed it and why? So, just as one example, when we first are introduced into a conversation, a political strategy session involving how is Valeria going? What is she going to do? To try to have it both ways. On the other hand, she's got all this anti-war rhetoric. On the other hand, she's going to have to fight for the preservation of this expensive and unnecessary military program, keeping it in her district. And the name of the program is the Next Generation Air Dominance Program. So Monty Cranston immediately points out that he advised the Pentagon to not use the word dominance in the name of this program, but instead to call it the Next Generation Air Defense Program. After all, he says, we don't talk about the War Department. We changed the name of the War Department. The Truman administration changed the name of the War Department in 1947. I think it was 47, maybe 48, to the Defense Department. It's great propaganda. It doesn't make war, it just provides defense. He says, defense is a good word. Nobody could argue against defense. I told them, call it the Next Generation Air Defense Program, but they wouldn't listen. Just like they wouldn't listen to me when they named their email sniffing program Carnivore, troubled people, or when John Poindexter named his domestic surveillance program Total Information Awareness. So Orwellian, it makes people nervous. He says they did much better when they called these programs Guardian Angel. So much in a name. He describes these things, these policies, as products with packaging and a rollout into the marketplace. This is a good way to understand what the government is doing. For example, when I think it was the Bush administration did the Bush II administration did the surge in Iraq, I imagined a committee coming up with this name. And look, of course, I imagine these things. It's what I do as a novelist. Of course, there was a committee. Of course, the people who come up with these policies think about what to call them and when to introduce them into the news cycle and how to position them and all these things, just like a company introducing a product with packaging, nomenclature, name for the product, all this stuff. And I can imagine in this committee, someone said, well, we're going to send 30,000 troops in. That's an escalation. And someone says, no, it can't be. An escalation is no good. It sounds like it's just one way, like it escalates. And then is it a ratchet? It's just going to keep escalating. It has notions of Vietnam where we kept escalating until we had 500,000 troops there. It's no good. We need something else. And they batted around some other names. And someone else was like, well, what if we call it like a surge? And immediately people get it. They're like, Jimmy, I like it. A surge. You know what I see? I see like the tide coming in. The tide surges up onto the beach. And then what happens? What happens when the tide surges up onto the beach? It recedes. It comes in, but then it goes back out. So it's temporary. We're letting people know implicitly this is just a temporary thing. By the way, when the tide surges onto the beach and then it recedes, what happens? It cleans off the beach. It wipes away the seaweed and the detritus, leaving the beach smooth and clean. This is the way these people think. And this is what's being done to us all the time. And the only self-defense that I know of is just to be aware of how we're being manipulated. When we first meet Monty Cranston, he is in an emergency session called to order by the Department of the Interior because there's been an oil catastrophe off the coast of Louisiana, one of our rigs out there. And what we quickly learned is that despite this is actually based on the what was it called?
Deepwater Horizon.
Thank you, Deepwater Horizon catastrophe where they actually had video of what was happening at the bottom of the ocean. It looked like an underwater volcano. It looked like Mount Vesuvius, Mount St. Helena. Like it was just spewing, exploding oil out of the seabed into the ocean. And yet, this is what gave me the idea for this. And yet, in all the news reports of this catastrophe, this underwater explosion, they all referred to it in one of only two ways: as a leak and as a spill. And there is no one who could see what was going on in this video. It's like spill, leak, these are not words that come to mind. So this is Monty Cranston explaining to everyone we need to stop using words like explosion and eruption. Those words conjure the wrong imagery. We're going to manage this incident. And he says, and notice how I just used a very dry word, incident. It doesn't conjure any imagery. It doesn't upset anyone. We're going to manage this incident using two words and two words only: leak and spill, because these conjure favorable imagery for us. When there's a leak, it's immediately containable. If there's a leak in the roof when it's raining, put a pan under it, and the pan catches all the water. It may be a little bit annoying or irritating. You may need to fix the roof, but it's not a catastrophe. The house isn't getting flooded. The leak is contained. Or spill. Somebody knocks over a little glass of milk and it spills. Now there's some milk on the floor, the table, whatever, and you get some paper towels and you wipe it up. It's limited. It's discrete. These are the notions that we need to position in the minds of the American public so that we can manage this incident the way it needs to be managed. This is what Monty does for a living. He's the best at it. And all of this stuff is integrated into the story. And I don't want to give the impression that Monty is in any way two-dimensional. Of course, I love him and he's my character, so I would argue that he's not at all two-dimensional. Don't take my word for it. Read the book yourself. He is a fully realized and quite poignant, I think, human being. It's just that he has this outsized skill that he deploys in a somewhat amoral way, because he just understands the software, the firmware of the humans, and he knows how it can be manipulated. He has, as he puts it, he has an almost superpower ability to understand the forest of human nature, but individual humans, the trees, he has almost no insight into that. And that's in some ways the tragedy of his life.
Well, I think the audience deserves to enjoy the experience of reading your book, but they can take my word for it that Monty is a fully realized character. He's my favorite character in the book.
Thank you.
And I would say so far, my favorite of your characters. And there's a scene in the book, this doesn't give away any spoilers, but where Monty is in his kitchen cooking dinner, thinking about his job, thinking about what Valeria is up against, and he's thinking about his parents, who are very supportive. And it's this really beautiful, like really amazingly rendered scene.
Thank you. Anytime you touch on the craft of fiction, it's like you're pressing a button that you should probably be careful not to press. But for anybody who's curious about any of these craft issues, the most fundamental thing you need to understand about dialogue, and this doesn't just apply to dialogue, but it applies more directly to dialogue than to any other craft element. It's this: you have to understand the difference between text and subtext. That is to say, the difference between what is said and what is meant. And if you take a look now, any scene where you love the dialogue in a movie, a book, television show, you love the dialogue, you just watch it again and again, it's such great dialogue, you will always see this: the gap between what's being said and what is actually meant. The greater the gap, the better the dialogue. You'll always see this. And so when Monty's in his kitchen and he's thinking about his parents, it's not dialogue, but we're in his head. So you can think of it as it's a monologue. And there is a gap between what he's able to see, acknowledge to himself, his own thoughts, and what must really have been the case and what he's really feeling. And I think that's part of what makes that scene poignant. There's a similar scene where Valeria and Monty are talking, and he acknowledges at some point that he never gets into this, but he had a difficult childhood. He's on the spectrum. He never gives you the specifics, but children can be cruel, and you can imagine what it was like for this kid growing up. And you get a feel for how great his parents were. And at one point, he says to Valeria, she was like, "Wow, you were able to see that, you were able to whatever." And he says, "Yeah, my parents used to call it a superpower." And she says, it must be wonderful to have a superpower. And there's a beat, and he says, "It can be." And that's a very small thing, 3 words, 3 syllables. But if I'm doing my job right, then you get a sense of the vast depths of what he went through as a kid to just partially acknowledge her point. Like, yeah, it can be good, but what is implied in those 3 words? A lot of hardship. And you'll always see that in the best dialogue. I'm going to give you one quick example. If anybody's ever seen the movie, it's an old Australian movie called Breaker Morant, which I loved. I mean, it must be at least 40 years old at this point, maybe closer to 50. It's based on a nonfiction book called Scapegoats of the Empire. It was written by a British soldier serving in South Africa during the Boer Wars, and the British government imprisoned and wound up executing 2 British soldiers for alleged war crimes, and they really were just scapegoats as part of the British Empire's attempt to wrap up this ridiculous war. And there's a scene at the end of the movie where, why am I blanking on the name of the actor? He played in the Equalizer television series before Antoine Fuqua started making the Denzel Washington movies based on the series, The Equalizer. Anyway, he plays the titular character, Harry Morant, and he's going to be executed, completely scapegoated for these alleged crimes as part of a larger diplomatic game, which actually tracks with a lot of the themes of the system. And another British soldier is talking to him at the end, and he's just, at this point, how cynical can you be? You've served your country, you've endured what you've killed, you've lost men, you've sullied your own soul, all in service of the empire, and now the empire is going to screw you. They're going to execute you at dawn. And this guy says to him, a lot of the men have been talking about this. There's talk of an escape. And Morant says, where would I go? Where would I go? And the guy says, we could get you a boat. You could see the world. And there's a long beat. And Morant says, I've seen it. And that's it. That to me is some of the greatest dialogue ever. Again, 3 words, 3 syllables. And you just get the level of pain and cynicism and despair and acceptance of the horror of what power is really used for and how it uses up the people who in all their innocence served it. It's all in there in those 3 words. Anything else would have just ruined it. Anyway, so the opposite of this would be what people call on-the-nose dialogue, where you collapse the text and the subtext and your characters are saying exactly what they mean. That's boring, always extremely dull. The greater the gap between what's said and what's meant, the better the dialogue. Just something to think about for anyone here who's interested in fiction.
Well, Barry,
told you not to press that button.
I first learned about you when you wrote a great review of Scott Horton's new book, Provoked. And at the time, we were palling around, chatting on the X, and I asked you which of your novels is most sort of aligned with the foreign policy focus of Scott.
Yeah.
And you recommended The God's Eye View.
Yeah.
Which I read and I loved.
Thank you. And you wrote such a great review for that book. And I say that not just because you obviously really enjoyed the book and you said some nice things about it, but your insights into things that I wasn't consciously aware of, but that were really supportable, well articulated points. I was like, damn, I don't know if I even realized that. But yeah, very interesting for me to read that review. Thank you.
My pleasure. And the villain in that book is the director of the National Security Agency.
Another euphemism.
And the audience should know that last week Barry and I tried to record this episode, and we thought we were recording, but in the parlance of a good government, mistakes were made. So if anyone wants to watch that episode, they're going to have to file an extremely clever FOIA request with the National Security
Right.
Agency. Um, but there's a lot of action and a lot of assassins and just craziness going on in that book. But at the time, you said the book I'm working on right now, The System, is going to be even more in line with what Scott and the guys at the Institute are really focused on with foreign policy and war and power.
Hmm.
And it certainly is. And what's so fascinating about it is that, I think as you put it, there's, compared to a lot of your other books, there's less action,
Mm.
but the same amount of sex. But you did a really good job of like putting in the terrifying aspect of the state's lethal capabilities. So there is action in the book. Don't get me wrong, audience. There's definitely action, but there's also some really just implicit horror
Mm.
that's really nicely tapped into.
Thank you. Yeah, my joke about this book is that it has all the sex, but not as much killing. And actually, I'm going to make a quick defense of both sex and violence in novels. Look, you can do anything and make it gratuitous, which means it doesn't serve any larger purpose. To me, if it's, if a love scene, as I like to call them, is there only to titillate, it's okay. It's just, but then it's only serving one function. And here's another heuristic, as the software engineers might say, for what is it good writing? How many things does it accomplish? If it accomplishes 0 things, it's terrible writing. If it accomplishes only one thing, it's boring writing. Good writing has to accomplish at least 2 things. Every sentence, every scene, passage, sequence, every act, the story itself, everything has to accomplish more than one thing, or it's just not good writing. And the more things it accomplishes, the better it is, the better the writing is. Again, you can look for this. If you start analyzing the craft, like any scene you love in a movie, novel, whatever, now you really love it, and you start breaking it down and asking yourself the question of, what does this scene or this line of dialogue or whatever, what does it accomplish in the story? If it's great, and if you love it, it's because it's good. And if it's good, it will always be accomplishing at least 2 things, and probably more than just those 2 things. So with regard to sex and violence, here's why I like them. Aside from the obvious reasons, that inside I'm only 14 years old, and who doesn't like a good sex or violence scene? They're accelerants for character, and revelation of character is what the best stories always do. All good stories are built on good characters. If the characters aren't good, there won't even be a story. If we don't care about the characters, if we don't care about who, we will not care about what. It's just how we're wired. I could go on and on about this. I could actually prove the point. But how much we care about a thing that's happening is almost entirely a function of how much we care about the people it's happening to or with, just how we're wired. It's why we care so much about the most trivial things in the world when they happen to us, because we don't care about anyone as much as we care about ourselves. I mean, maybe our family, our children, whatever. But when even the most trivial things in the world are happening to the people you care the most about, those trivial things suddenly become not so trivial. They really get on your mind. They can keep you awake at night. So we care much more about who than we do about what. And the revelation of who, character arcs, decisions made under pressure, revealing character. This is all the stuff of the greatest stories. And for me, sex and violence are accelerants in this regard. So there's a scene I always love in a movie I love from way back when called Say Anything with John Cusack. And there's a scene where John Cusack and Iona Skye, who are sort of dating, but then they finally wind up having sex. And he's trying to be blasé about it. And he says to his friend, Lily, I forget the actress's name. Anyway, he's trying to be low key about it. Like, yeah, we had sex. But anyway, he tries to go on. She goes, no, wait a minute. That's everything. That matters so much. Like, You might never see each other again until you're 60 years old, or really old people or whatever. And then you'll run into each other and you'll say, "Hey, how you doing?" And she'll say, "Fine, how are you?" But what you'll both really be thinking is, "We had sex." So it matters. It changes everything. Um, it takes things in new directions. And so in this sense, it's like the Bible said, Abraham knew Sarah. I love that euphemism. That's one of the best euphemisms ever. Yeah, you really get to know someone by how they make love. And so I like to, that's just a great story and character accelerant. And likewise, violence. Um, Violence is the almost universal human phobia. How people deal with its possibility, its reality, its aftermath, um, not only shows us a tremendous amount about their character, but changes so many things. I'm friends with a self-defense instructor, a guy I've trained with who's awesome, Tony Blauer. And Tony makes the point that, like, how much you pay for an insurance policy against this, fire insurance, life insurance, flood insurance, whatever. He's like, if you're the victim of a physical attack, the the cost of that attack, even if you survive it, even if it's just, as another friend of mine, Rory Miller, calls, an educational beatdown, kind of social violence. Nobody's even trying to kill you, and you don't get killed. There are huge, huge costs to that. What's it worth to you to pay for, how much would you pay for an insurance policy that improves your chances of coming through one of these things successfully? I think it's a really interesting way to look at these things. So, so violence is another thing that really changes everything, even relatively low-level violence. And so for that reason too, it's just it's a great thing to work with when you're dealing with characters and stories. Similarly, anyone who's ever watched a television show, watch for this in television shows. You're always going to have at least one character. I don't know about always, but frequently you're going to have at least one character who is either a doctor or a nurse, someone who works in a hospital, and also someone who's a cop or works in a police station, some other capacity, something having to do with law enforcement. And why is that? Because hospitals and police stations are like nodes of society. It doesn't matter how rich or poor or black or white or gay or straight or male or female or whatever. Everybody, if they get sick, they're going through they get injured or there's a car accident where they're going through the hospital. That's just everybody. And likewise, no matter what happens, if somebody breaks into your house, there's a kidnapping or whatever, there's rich or poor or whatever, the police are going to get involved. So just as plot points, if you want to connect all the different nodes of your stories, you can use as two central nodes is going to be medical and law enforcement. Just a good thing to keep in mind if you're ever, how do I get all these people together? It's always something like that. Stranger Things, Stranger Things, great show. First two seasons, after that, I wasn't as much of a fan. And by the way, the Duffer Brothers, the guys who wrote that show, they've got a terrific master class. There's a company called Masterclass where you can it's fantastic. You can really learn some great stuff about all different topics. For me, writing is the focus. So I watched the Duffer Brothers Masterclass. And one of their characters is, of course, the sheriff of this small town, because that means that just puts him in touch with everyone. Anyone who has a problem, they call the sheriff, and now he is able to connect all these different nodes in the society. It's just a plot device to think about. It gets used a lot because it works. Told you not to ask me those craft questions.
Well, one thing that I really like about the system is that it focuses on like power itself, power as such, centered in state power. And one thing that you see a lot is there'll be the villain in a movie or a TV show is like an evil corporation.
Yeah.
Or it's just like it's an authoritarian character. And there's the implication that like the government's good, or at least it's potentially good. It's this black box of potential benevolence.
Right.
But it's been corrupted by money, by bad guys, by authoritarians, by racists. And like, there are people making a lot of money off of selling stuff to the government, and they do lobby for those sales. They lobby for the militarist policies and the specific wars that make it necessary. But the real power is that power to unleash the violence.
Yeah.
And your antagonist, I wouldn't necessarily call a guy a villain.
Mm.
He's just doing his job.
Yeah.
But your antagonist is an Air Force general.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I love
Colonel.
that.
But yeah. Yeah.
Not, the CEO of like some evil tech company or even a weapons manufacturer. But
Mm.
no, the guy right there who's going to deploy these weapons, who's going to oversee the war,
Yeah.
who's going to be potentially in a situation room with maybe even the president saying, these are the options on the table,
Yeah.
Mr. President.
Yeah.
In speaking of the table, I think it's God's eye view, you have this idea, or maybe it's in the system, but you have this idea about how when the president gets options for like military strikes, they'll call it a menu.
Yeah.
So there's this analogy of just sitting down to have dinner,
Yep.
dining. What you're actually talking about is unleashing massive violence.
Yeah. This is in the system. It is, in fact, called the menu. This is the nuclear options, the nuclear attack options presented to the menu. Anybody who wants to read more about this, writer named Annie Jacobson has an absolutely terrific book. Came out, I think, about a year and a half ago. It's called Nuclear War, a Scenario, which is another book that I drew on in writing the system. And I'm pretty sure that Annie's book is where I first read about the menu. And if I'm misremembering right now where I came up with that or where I came across that term, in every one of my books, and particularly in the system, I put endnotes, at the end, so that people can see the factual basis for my fiction. And if anyone reads this stuff and thinks, "What, that couldn't be, that's going too far," I'm like, well, here you go. Here are my sources. So the menu, you could just Google this nuclear menu, and you'll find all sorts of information. It's also in the endnotes of my book. And as I said, I'm pretty sure, among other disturbing true life things, Annie Jacobson covers the concept in her book, Nuclear War, a Scenario. And my guy, my antagonist, villain. Again, I like you. I tend not to think so much in terms of heroes and villains, in part because nobody looks in the mirror and sees a villain looking back. Nobody, no one who we all might agree, or a majority of people might agree, is villainous, looked in the mirror and saw a villain looking back. It's an important thing to understand, and people really resist it. I know we're both Daryl Cooper fans, and I think the reason that, for anyone who's listening, Daryl Cooper's a historian, got a podcast called Martyr Made, Martyr, MADE. And
he's got a new podcast called
yeah, well, what
Provoked.
am I saying? How could I forget to mention that? I just started listening to it last night. Yeah. Provoked with Scott. Yeah. I think Daryl gets misunderstood because without taking a position on a conflict, he just tries to see it through the eyes of the ordinary people who were caught up in it. And his latest series is called Enemy, and it's about how Germans viewed World War II. There must have been a way that Germans viewed World War II. I mean, that's just a fact. It's not like the Germans didn't have a view on World War II, just like it's a fact that Americans had a view on it, and British and French and Japanese and Chinese, Russians, everyone who was caught up in World War II, the ordinary people caught up in this, the worst thing that's ever happened in human history, as Daryl Cooper points out. Everyone must have had a view about it. And it's interesting that if you try to present some sort of insightful take into what did this feel like and look like to people who are on the other side of it, you can be attacked for, I don't know, being a Nazi sympathizer or something like that. And it's like, hey, man, I'm not taking a position on any of these things. And Daryl's no Nazi sympathizer. But it's interesting that people will overreact and try to turn it into something that, to me, it isn't. In fact, I'm going to say one more thing about this because it's more and more it interests me, and it relates to fiction. So anytime fiction crosses over into real life, that's I guess that's my sweet spot. Um, we're wired to see the world much more through the prism of who than we are about what than we are through what. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and uh, because people care so much more about who than they do about what, it, if you've worked hard to try to suppress that who prism, try to correct for that who prism, and to see things a little bit with a little less of that who distortion just for what they are. Um, People who haven't worked as hard at that process as maybe you have cannot understand your approach, which is what centric, not who centric. And you'll get responses like this, like the one I just described with Daryl. I was like, well, I think this is how ordinary Germans, through my extensive research of correspondence, diary entries, all sorts of other um, historical records, this is my sense of how ordinary Germans viewed the war, or even how the Nazis viewed it, the government, like what was going on in their minds as they did this thing. People would be like, you must be some kind of Nazi sympathizer. It's like, what are you talking about? Now, I get maybe 1/10,000th the flack that Scott Horton gets in connection with his work and his book Provoked, the thesis of which is right there in the title. I don't even think of it as a thesis. I just think of it as an axiom or a fact that, yes, NATO metastasis is what provoked Russia into finally invading Ukraine. That's my opinion. It's certainly Scott's opinion. It's
Well, Barry,
okay.
NATO was merely a defensive
No, that's
alliance.
exactly right.
And Russia knew that. They knew that.
They must have known that. We all,
Yeah, we told them.
if there's one thing humans are good at, it's accurately understanding what's going on in the minds of other humans. I mean, we understand other humans' minds exactly as well as we understand our own. So, look, I'm perfectly happy to discuss, argue, debate, whatever. Like, what are the real causes of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Although, actually, if I were using America-centric technology, I would describe it as Russia's intervention in Ukraine. And amusingly, they do call it the special military operation, which I think is, see, all governments are fundamentally alike. But anyway,
They
it's
had
not
a
a war.
duty to protect.
Yeah, that's right. What is it called? A responsibility to protect, R2P. So, yeah, I know I keep doing parenthetical upon parenthetical, but there's another writer I really like, John Schwartz, who's also on Twitter. I forget his handle. It's JON, and then Schwartz is SCHWARZ. John examined all the Soviet archives that about the war and their war in Afghanistan that opened up with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it's fascinating that the Soviet government had exactly the same kind of self-justifications with regard to their invasion of Afghanistan that America had with regard to America's invasion of a war in Vietnam, in South Vietnam against North Vietnam, the bombing of North Vietnam, all that kind of stuff. Same kind of justifications. We're just trying to protect freedom and these people, their autonomy to choose their own government, all this kind of stuff. All governments are much more alike than they are different. But regardless of how you might view the actual causes of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we should be talking about these things. Well, fine. I don't know everything. I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I don't think Scott is wrong, but maybe he is. It's fine. Let's talk about it. But what you get instead is this reflexive Orwellian duck speak. And it goes like this. Those are Kremlin talking points. I get that a lot. And I'm just a guy who makes up stories. I mean, Scott's a historian who writes thick books with 7,000 footnotes on these topics. And if you think about it, it's an absolutely bizarre non sequitur of a response to take what I'm saying, the facts I am trying to interpret, the what of it all, and to immediately transform it into something that only matters insofar as who. Like, who really cares if there's overlap between my opinion and someone else's? Like, if Putin were to say, I think a nuclear war would be a bad idea, and I say, I think a nuclear war would be a bad idea too, would you say to me, you're a Putin apologist, those are Kremlin talking points? That's completely mad. That's just insane. It's possible to make up your own mind based on the facts before you, even if you're wrong, without regard to who might be saying this stuff. But for people who can't do that, who can only understand what is happening in the world based on looking around and seeing who is talking about it and how they're talking about it, who am I aligning with, who do my opinions align with, if that's the only way you can understand the world, then you will not be able to understand when someone else is being more dispassionate. You'll say, wait a minute, you don't agree with the America-centric take on this, that NATO is a wholly defensive alliance and that Russia knew that and the blah, blah, blah. You must be aligning yourself with the enemy. You must just be saying those things because Russia says those things. And I'm like, that's pull your head out of your ass. There's another way, a better way. And we don't have to agree, but your entire methodology, it's demented. But the first
Yeah,
step
Scott
towards
was
solving,
he was attacked on a podcast. And the guy, I forget his name, but he was like, I mean, he names the book Provoked. He starts with his conclusion that it's provoked, and then he writes this whole book to try to back up. And like, no, bro. He saw what was happening. He interviewed hundreds of people about it. He read all these books and these newspaper articles, and he saw what actual Western officials were saying. And he realized, oh my God, they provoked this. That's why it's called that.
yeah. One of the things I've noticed about the internet, like when the internet is great, it's just so great. I've encountered some of the most fascinating minds, even on Twitter. And Twitter overall, I hate Twitter. Twitter to me is a drug that just.
What's Twitter?
Thank you. X, formerly known as Twitter. It's funny how this is. It's all like at some point it's going to be like dating. A thing that people use to date themselves. Right. I'm just never going to stop thinking of it as Twitter. And I actually thought Twitter was a good name, and I can't imagine changing a well-known brand name that's developed significant secondary meaning, as the trademark lawyers say. Like that's hard to do, and then changing it to something as bland and banal and meaningless as X. But whatever. What do I know? Elon Musk's a trillionaire, and I'm just a guy who writes stories. But if we're going this route, I would also.
He's a super oligarch.
He's a mega uber oligarch. These things interest me too, like how I probably shouldn't do things like this. I've gotten better, but many years ago, the president of the publishing house I was then publishing with, which was Penguin Putnam, they kept calling my books Rain This and Rain That, and I really hated it because the titles just didn't have anything to do with the stories except for the coincidence, the play on words they were using. My protagonist in that series, John Rain is his name. He's a half American, half Japanese contract killer whose specialty is making it look like natural causes. His name is Rain, and the first book was Rainfall. Second book was Hard Rain. Third book was Rainstorm. Fourth book was Killing Rain, and what was killing my soul. I'm like, oh my God. And people were sending me, good-natured emails or messages that said, what's the next one going to be? Rain Check, Raincoat. And I'd laugh and say, I know we're running out of puns on the word rain. So I begged my publisher, can we please stop doing this? And the fifth book got called The Last Assassin. It's a cool title, but it didn't really have much to do with the story. It's not like John Rain was the last assassin, but he is an assassin. It's not that the title had nothing to do with the story, and it was better than Rain This, Rain That. And for whatever reason, and there are a lot of reasons, it's not a scientific experiment we're controlling for all the variables. My sales were respectable for the first four books, enough so that Putnam wanted to keep publishing my books. But the fifth book took a big leap. And what they learned there, and this was just so interesting to me about the humans generally and the way the mind, the typical mind and groupthink works, they were like, got it. Sales were good for the Rain This, Rain That books, but then we put assassin in the title and boom, get a big jump. So assassin is the magic. And we need to keep saying assassin now. Like before we said rain, 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 rain. Now we're going to say assassin, assassin. So they wanted to call the sixth book, I wish I were joking about this, the Quiet Assassin. I know. It hurts me. This is a true story. I know. These are the experts And I'm sorry, like, I know it's so much meta, but I'm like, John Kennedy said, how many times have I told myself not to trust the experts? This is after the pigs. This is not a critique of expertise generally. I believe in expertise. If I have a brain tumor and the doctor's like, we need to do this or do that, I'm going like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just going to make something up. That's bullshit. I don't go up into the cockpit when someone's flying the airplane and start telling them how to do their jobs. I don't believe that expertise is valueless, but I also believe in common sense and life experience and not suspending all that stuff just because someone happens to be an expert. And in this case, all the experts were like, we're going to call it the Quiet Assassin. And I sent them this really Dale Carnegie-esque letter. And I was like, look, I know you guys are thinking, oh, assassin is the magic thing. So we're going to say assassin, assassin. And it's always and it's going to be great for sales. But if you think about it, the Quiet Assassin it's not a good title. And here's why. There's nothing interesting in it. It's not completely redundant the way, say, the lethal assassin or the deadly assassin would be utterly redundant, because after all, assassins are, by their trade, lethal, deadly. So it's not quite like that, but we certainly expect our assassins to be quiet, stealthy, silent, right? I mean, it's not surprising. What might get someone's attention, what might cause them to focus for a moment, is if you were to call the book The Noisy Assassin, for example. And in fact, Margaret Atwood had a book called The Blind Assassin. That's an interesting title. I didn't read the book. I don't even know what it's about. But your brain kind of catches on it for a moment, right? Like if you're in the bookstore and you walk past something called The Blind Assassin, for at least a second, you think, oh, can you be blind and also an assassin? That's unusual. And so it is attention getting. But the Quiet Assassin is just redundant. So I had to make this whole, and we argued about it. And I wanted to call it The Killer Ascendant, which is what the story is about. This is like John Wayne has buried this stuff. He's trying to live a much more civilian life. And so things happen. Once upon a time, there was a retired assassin who's trying to live a quiet life and just get it together and find some peace. And then one day a thing happens and he has to go all the way back into what he was doing before. So it's the killer ascendant, like what's inside him just comes to the fore. That's what the story is about. That encapsulates it. I'm going to come back to Provoked in 1 second because all this connects. And anyway, we wound up compromising on Requiem for an Assassin. So we did get to use I even said, look, if we want to use magic words, how about if we call it the Sudoku Assassin or the Da Vinci Assassin? Sudoku was big at the time. The Da Vinci Code was big. I'm like, let's just call it that. And we can use this, if it's not going to have anything to do with the story anyway. We wound up compromising. But with regard to Provoked, here's the thing. Like, I hate these arguments that people make and they don't even consider them. Like Douglas Murray with his telling Scott, like, well, have you been there? It's, like you can't have an opinion about what's going on in a place, anything that's going on in a place, including war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever. You can't have an opinion about that unless you've been there, which if you think about it, that principle it makes no sense. It doesn't work. It's incoherent. If we take that alleged principle seriously, it means that historians can't do what they do, because after all, you've never been to ancient Rome. How can you possibly have an opinion about what might have been going on there if you've never been there? And likewise, anything that's happening anywhere in the world, nobody's been to every one of these places. And even if you have been there, what does that mean? Did you just pass through the airport? Did you spend a week? Were you on an IDF guided tour, which is obviously designed to manipulate and constrain your perceptions and what you're allowed to see? Do you have to have lived there for a year? Do you need to speak the language? Do you need to speak to a certain random sampling of people? All these things. It's just an incoherent attempt at weaponizing an alleged principle. It's ridiculous. And likewise, the title Provoked is Scott's thesis. It's his topic sentence. Like when we all learned how to write an essay in high school, these are things that's like, a little background, upside down triangle, comes down to your topic sentence, your argument. This is my position. And then evidence in favor of the argument, evidence, restatement of the thesis, and we build back out to something general, and we're done. So however Scott got there, and I'm sure it was in an iterative way, he's got certain default settings, as we all do, and these are informed by his experience in the world, the way he looks at events, things conducted by his own government, like like what happened in Waco, and then the government stories, the way the government tried to position that and explain it away afterwards and come up with explanations, justifications after the fact. Scott sees all this stuff. He follows these things closely, and so of course he starts to develop a coherent, um, well-sourced opinion about the use and applications and reasons and justifications for U.S. power. And now he's applying that to events in the world, including NATO metastasis over the course of 3 decades, about which he knows a lot because he follows these things closely. And after putting all these things together and doing all the research, he's like, I think on balance, NATO provoked this war. It wasn't like Putin woke up one Tuesday morning or whatever it was and said, I think I might just invade Ukraine today because I'm feeling like Peter the Great or the new Hitler or whatever. Let's just give it a go. That's not how he sees it. So his argument, and it's completely okay to disagree with the argument. Nobody is right about everything. I happen to think Scott is absolutely right about this, but that doesn't matter. His argument is that NATO provoked the war. Now, what do you want to do with your book title? You want to have it encapsulate what is most significant about your book. I mentioned that a moment ago, where I thought the best title for what Putnam called Requiem for an Assassin was The Killer Ascendant. By the way, when I got my rights back, I changed that title along with a few others, because that encapsulates the essence of the story. That's what provoked is in the title of that book. He's basically saying, this is my argument. Why would you not call it that? What did I already forgot his name, the three name guy you mentioned who was complaining
Walter
about
Russell Mead.
Walter Russell Mead. What would he have called the book? It's a perfect title. Again, even if you disagree with Scott's argument, it is a perfect title.
He would have called the book Unprovoked.
Wait, he wanted to. Exactly. That's exactly right, because that's his argument. And that would be fine. It's like, hey, Walter, why don't you write your book about how Putin is the new Hitler, and he thinks he's Peter the Great, and Russia is relentlessly expansionist and wants to take over all of Europe as just a staging ground for the conquest of New Jersey. Do that. You got this, man. And you can call it Unprovoked. And that would be a good title for your book. By the way, I try not to, I'm not saying Provoked is a great title because I agree with the book. I'm really not. I do think it's a great book, and I think it's a great title. But I'm not saying it's a great title.
One might even say a killer title.
Killer title. Exactly. I'll give you a counterexample. Some years ago, I got invited by an organization called the Association of Former Intelligence Officers to give a talk about intelligence and propaganda alongside former CIA and NSA director Michael Hayden, who himself was promoting, and this was the guy, it was the God's Eye View had just come out. And so they said, you want to come talk about the God's Eye View, which is about domestic surveillance, what the American surveillance state calls bulk surveillance, that kind of thing. Never domestic surveillance. Or domestic, what do they call it? Bulk collection, not surveillance. They don't even call it surveillance. It's bulk collection. I call it domestic surveillance, whatever. So, Barry, would you like to talk about the God's Eye View? Michael Hayden's going to be talking about his new memoir. Michael Hayden's new memoir was called Playing to the Edge. I forget the subtitle, but it was like Playing to the Edge of My Life in U.S. Intelligence or something like that. But the main title was Playing to the Edge. And I actually think that is a great title for this book, a horribly propagandistic title. But if you're trying to sell books and encapsulate your argument, Playing to the Edge was a great title. And in fact, it was really fun for me. It wasn't a debate. I would have loved it if they had been willing to set it up that way. It was a discussion. I like discussion more than I like debate. Debate is entertaining, but I think discussion is better if you're trying to get to the heart of things. Because what I said to Michael Hayden in the course of my remarks is I praised him for his great title. I'm like, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you entitled the book Playing to the Edge. I saw you give an interview where you said, your attitude is this: you don't make the rules. That's Congress. Congress makes the rules, and then you get to play within a field defined by Congress's rules. But within that field, according to the rules of the game that Congress has established, you will play all the way to the edge of that playing field to the point where you get chalk dust on your cleats. That's how close you're coming to the edge of the game you're playing. Would you say that's a fair encapsulation of your thinking behind the title. And he was like, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I knew it was fair. I always try to be fair. I really do. I'd heard him give the interview, but still I wanted to give him the chance if I was getting anything wrong. I said, okay, so here's what I think. It's a great title. And I'm a student of good titles. It's part of how I make a living, and I pay a lot of attention to this stuff. It's going to sell a lot of books, but here's what I don't like about it. It's propagandistic. Because when we refer to a game, when you say you're playing to the edge, you talk about chalk dust on the cleats, what do people see? And again, this relates to like the surge, the ocean tide. It comes in and it goes out, and that's good for the people who are trying to introduce this new product, this new policy into American consciousness. When people think about a field with chalk demarcations, you're talking about a soccer field or a football field, cleats, that kind of thing. What are the three elements of any one of these games I'm talking about? You've got rules. Those rules are enforced by a referee. And you have spectators who are watching the game. They can see the game and they can see the way it's being played. None of those three things is present in the game of intelligence as you are playing it. The rules are unknown to the American people. They don't even know what the rules are. Whatever you think you're playing to, nobody knows the rules. There is no referee. You might argue that the referee is the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which is, even that is propagandistic. This is in no traditional sense a court. It is an executive agency that rubber stamps intelligence apparatus requests. 99.97% of intelligence agency requests submitted to FISA, the FISA court, are approved. There's no one there arguing the other side. It's not an adversarial process. It's a bunch of guys who are listening to someone come in and say, hey, we really need to surveil these people. Are you okay with it? And every time they say yes. This has nothing to do with what anyone would recognize as an Article 3 court. It's just not a court. But it's called a court because it's good propaganda. So there's no referee. There's no one watching what you're doing or calling balls and strikes or fouls or penalties or anything else. That thing doesn't exist. And what's the other thing that's missing? There's no audience. There's no one watching on TV. There's no one in the spectator stands. All of these things that your title conjures in the mind to make us feel like, oh, well, that's okay then. It's like a game. I know what a game is. I watch football every Sunday. It's fine. It's nothing like that. So I didn't say it quite as harshly as to him as I am right now, but the phraseology was all the same. I was a little more gentle in the delivery. And he was sort of smiling uncomfortably because I don't think these things are even arguable. One other thing I'll mention along these lines.
Well, wait, just
Go
a
ahead, I'm sorry.
question.
Yeah.
Just a question. You know how when the president is like traveling around, there's a guy that has a briefcase to wage nuclear war?
Yeah,
what do
this
they
is
call
also in the
that?
book. Called the football.
What?
And the codes that he cracks open are called the biscuit. And then he can look at the menu. I know. What do you make of this? I mean, George Carlin, who was a national treasure, would have just, and who I've got epigraphs introducing each of the 63 chapters in the book and one to introduce the book itself. And the one that introduces the book itself is George Carlin, and that is, it's a big club and you ain't in it, which is from Carlin's comedy special from about 20 years ago, Life is Worth Losing. And he was really a national treasure, just one of the best. Anyway, the best on this kind of stuff. Yeah, he would have had a feel like, why? What are we doing with this? He really used to examine these things closely and why the nomenclature is changing and what it's intended to imply or what it's intended to conceal. So, yeah, I love this stuff. And another one was, if you remember when Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and Bart Gellman were first reporting on the Snowden revelations in 2013, excuse me. And one of the things they published was that chart of the NSA, and it was like, sniff it all. I wish I could remember each off the top of my head. Each category was like sniff it all, collect it all, process it all, know it all, apply it all. Like everything was all. And when then NSA Director Keith Alexander was getting pressed about this a little bit by reporters, he said something that, again, if you think of this as a book title or just as propaganda, tactically, it's genius. Respect for the tactical genius, even though at the same time it's evil and designed to obfuscate its propaganda. He said, look, we're trying to collect a needle we're trying to find a needle, and to find the needle, you have to collect all the hay. duh. And of course, beyond credulous establishment reporters just looking for something for them to say, oh, okay, then I'm glad. Thank you for giving us a reason to write this up in a way that shows how you're just trying to keep the American people safe from all the enemy regimes out there. That was how he said it. And I talked about this also in that talk I gave that day, where I said, but this is great propaganda because it immediately conjures images of like Andrew Wyeth, the girl in the field, or maybe Norman Rockwell, like bucolic America farms. Hay, it's just hay. It's like you got a barn, there's some hay on the floor of the barn, and you got a farmer in there and he's just trying to sweep up all the hay with a rake or a broom or whatever, just tidying up the barn. It's just, that's not bad. It's wonderful propaganda. But I said, but if you think about it, it makes no sense whatsoever. The expression find a needle in a haystack it's just about, if you're looking for a needle and it's in a haystack, then it will be hard to find. But if you're looking for a needle, you don't go out and search for hay. Someone's already told you the needle's in that haystack. And so it's hard to find the needle. The hay's already collected, the needle's in there. It's going to be hard to find. So I said, so like saying that to find the needle, you need to collect all the hay. That's like saying to find the needle, you need to collect all the lettuces or all the bicycles or something. Like needles have nothing to do, no organic connection with hay or bicycles or lettuces. So saying you need to collect all of the one to find the other it's mental. It's demented. It makes no sense whatsoever. And the only thing Keith Alexander could have coherently meant with that statement is that to find the thing we're looking for, we need to collect everything. But it wasn't, and okay, if you collect everything, then, the needle for sure is, whether you can find it is another story, but the needle will be in there. The needle is the subset of everything. You're now collecting everything. But he couldn't say to the American people, yeah, we're collecting everything, all your shit, all of it. Because then that would be like total information awareness and carnivore. Then people would be like, I'm not sure I like that. So instead, he did this Andrew Wyeth thing about like, it's just like some hay and it's a barn and it's a farmer. Go back to sleep. It's like when Obama used to say like, nobody's trying to read your letters to your grandma. Like, is that even a thing? And people are like, oh, well, that's all right. And I think I don't really say anything to my grandmother. I'm like, when was the last time you even wrote your grandmother a letter? Like, why would this be about that? But it's a great example because it just puts people back to sleep. And these things, sometimes in a skilled practitioner, this kind of propaganda, I'm sure, is done off the cuff and it's skillful and effective and well done. But much more often, it's Monty Cranston, who's got tremendous experience in these matters, tremendous supernatural superpower acumen, and he is working out just what nomenclature to use, just what product name will be right, what packaging will be right, just what day of the week to put it into the news cycle, and all these things to properly introduce it into the consciousness of ordinary people so that they can go back to sleep and let power keep serving itself. That's the overall theme, I would say, of the system. And in fact, like one very brief last thing about this is, if I had to encapsulate what you will see in the book, it's back to George Carlin, who again, in his comedy special, Life is Worth Losing, made this point, which I think is absolutely fundamental to understanding power, not just in America, but power generally, but certainly power in America. And it's this, like, if you think Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Nancy Pelosi or anyone who, just name your heroic political representative, if you think that person cares more about you than they care about other powerful people within the system in which they operate, then you have a fundamental understanding of power. The very first epigraph in the book, chapter 1, after the George Carlin intro, is Orwell. And that epigraph is, the object of power is power. If you don't understand that, then I think you're going to have a distorted view of reality. And in America, power serves power. We ordinary people are at best in irrelevance. More often, we're a resource to be exploited or manipulated, or we could be collateral damage. We could just be hurt, damaged, killed. That's not really the purpose, but doesn't matter very much to our rulers one way or the other. I know it's painful and uncomfortable to accept what I just described, which to me is just reality. But to be in denial about it is to reduce our ability to at least mitigate the pernicious effects of this system that has grown up in the last 250 or so years, and certainly accelerated since World War II. Anyway, that's the overall theme, I would say, is that you'll see in the system is they don't care about you. What George Carlin said in the special, they don't care about you. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all. They care about certain things, but it's not about you. And the first step towards solving a problem is recognizing it for what it is. And if I've done anything else with the system, that's what I've tried to depict.
I think you definitely achieved it. And I think it's why the system pairs so well with Scott's book, Provoked. I'd like to urge
a really nice compliment. Thank you.
I'd like to urge the audience to purchase both these books. You got Provoked, the nonfiction. You got The System, the fiction. They both have sources. And in fact, the great Peter Van Buren said that Provoked reads a lot like a thriller. I know you've written a great piece about how 1984 is a thriller.
Yeah, that was something I wrote for NPR. Yeah.
Great piece. And so, yeah, I suggest that the audience pick up both books. Scott's been recording an audio version of Provoked. And I know that you brought in a really great voice actor, bit of a celebrity.
Multiple award winning.
To record The System audiobook. Who was that, Barry?
Well, it's a joke in my house. It's me. I narrate all my own books, and the feedback has been really nice, which I guess especially nice because I must be some sort of frustrated actor or mimic or something. So even the New York Times had some quite kind things to say about my narration skills in my audiobooks, and readers seem to get a big kick out of it too. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I often say to my wife, I'm like, I am a multiple award-winning voice talent. And she's like, oh my God, please find a way to make this stop.
For The God's Eye View, I listened to your audiobook. And I got to say, I love hearing your words come out of your mouth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My family seems to feel the same way, except when I get to the love scenes, and then my brother.
Man, you nail the love scenes. I could see why maybe they experience it differently, but
yeah, my brother skips over those parts. He's like, yeah, he won't even read them. He's like, yeah, I read it, and then I can't. I was like, right, I know it. They go to bed, and I turn a couple pages, and I'm okay. I'm like, that's fine.
Well, yeah, audience, please check out The System and follow us on X, formerly Twitter. I'm at WeeksJF. And Barry, what are you at?
Just my name, Barry Eisler, or at Barry Eisler, BARRYEISLER.
Yeah, check us out. They're always palling around, posting cool articles and critiquing the war party propaganda.
It's my hobby.
Well, Barry, thank you so much for talking with me today and for sharing your wisdom and your wit and your some other thing that starts with W. So I can please Monty Cranston.
Monty Cranston would come up with something. Thank you, John. This has really been fun. I'm glad we got to do the do-over. It's always a pleasure.
Definitely. Cheers.
Bye.